Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the Product in LA podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Cole, and this is an opportunity to shine the spotlight on some of the exceptional technology leaders we have as part of the LA community. With us today is Adam Judelson in the studio. Thanks for joining us, Adam.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
This is going to be a great one. More with you in a moment, but first, a word from our sponsors. Product in LA is brought to you by Uruit, available at uruit.com. Do you need help completing your roadmap items? Uruit is a digital product development agency with over 15 years of experience helping companies build web and mobile apps by embedding directly into their Scrum teams. Uruit's expert full-stack software developers provide quality code to help you get the job done. If you need React or Angular front-end devs, or perhaps help with Node.js, .NET, or Python development, DevOps, or even product or design to help solidify requirements, they're ready to help you close out roadmap items and actually release to customers. Learn more at uruit.com. That's uruit.com. We're also brought to you by the Product Managers Association Los Angeles, available at pma.la. They are the largest professional organization for product and designers in LA. With more than 3,000 members from over 500 companies, they host monthly meetups, organize the Product Leader Council, where CPOs and heads of product connect in small 6 to 8 member pods, and have a mentorship program where they connect working product managers with students from underrepresented groups to build a better, more diverse next gen. To learn more about the program, go to pma.la. To learn more about the mentorship program, go to pma.la/mentorship. Our guest today is Adam Judelson. He's the founder and managing partner at First Principles Catalyst. And his past roles include president/CEO, COO at MyPrism. He's also been the VP of product at Slingshot Aerospace, the VP of product and general manager at Deloitte, and he's been head of product at Palantir Technologies. And one interesting fact you might pull from his LinkedIn profile page, he had an early role as an analyst in quotation marks from the U.S. government. And, for me, the title often is reserved for spies in TV movies and on TV. Anything like that, Adam? Anything you're allowed to talk about your analyst days from the U.S. government?
It's a great question. I mean, what I can say is that I focused on national security and making sure that our senior policymakers were informed at all times, and I had a great time.
All right, so not much from that one. That doesn't mean that it was far off from the question. So that's terrific. So interesting to see your path went to an analyst at the government, but what was your journey going into technology? None of the things that we are playing around with today existed when we were growing up, at least in the forms they are today. Did you expect to find yourself where you are? Did you expect to go that route, or how did you get here?
It's a great question. And I think it's one of those questions where in retrospect, the answer is incredibly obvious, right, that I would have ended up in technology. I grew up in Silicon Valley. My formative years were watching, all of these amazing companies get built, and heck, I almost did a technical degree instead of sort of a softer degree. I was going to be a chemical engineering major, and then at the last minute, I changed my mind and ended up doing foreign service at Georgetown. Completely different universities that I was considering.
Wow.
And so I think in a way, I didn't yet think in my mind that it was really cool to be a software engineer or an engineer. I think I sort of associated in the early part of my career, engineering as more the sort of traditional laboratory bench work, test tubes, and that sort of an environment.
Okay.
And it didn't yet feel cool, if that makes sense. And so my journey to get into technology, in a way, started in the very beginning. It started in high school. We had a teacher that forced us all to participate in the Silicon Valley Science and Engineering Fair. And we were all, we all just complained. We were like, nobody wants to do this. It's a lot of extra work. I mean, it's literally hundreds of hours of extra work during a semester. You don't get any credit for it.
Right.
It doesn't count toward your grade or anything like that. It's the last thing that high school students want to be doing. But it turns out that my partner and I actually won grand prize at the Silicon Valley Science and Engineering Fair. And that's probably the first time that I thought to myself, maybe there's something here. And then
I might be good at this thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we went on to win a fourth prize at the International Science and Engineering Fair. One big whole tier above that. And what I did had nothing to do with digital work. I was working with lowering emissions in engines used on boats. That was the kind of project that people, put into the science fair.
You were doing that in high school?
In high school, yeah, wow. Yeah. But again, because we were forced, right? Because we were told you have to come up with something. And my partner and I kind of talked to each other, and we're like, I don't know, we're kind of interested in cars, and what's with all the like different octane ratings on the gas pump? Does any of that stuff really matter? And everybody was advertising that their fuel additives were the best, and so we just kind of wanted to get to the bottom of that. And so we did that research, in a very amateur way, but apparently good enough to actually win at the local and international level.
Wow.
And that's the first time that I really thought about maybe being in technology in a first class way. And then I completely did a 180 and decided not to do a technical degree and not to pursue chemical engineering. And I think that was great because, one of the pieces of advice that I give people, especially who want to get into the product side of things or get into startups, is to go do real work first. Like, go do real work somewhere doing something other than like the meta act of helping others do the work, which is essentially what product is, right? It's helping others to do their job insanely well at scale really easily.
Right.
And so that's kind of how I got into it. Ultimately, when I left the government, Palantir was just starting its work with government clients.
Okay.
And they approached me. I had a completely different plan in mind. I was going to go to law school. I was actually already ready to go to law school. I had told people that's what I was going to do. I was going to do national security law. They had one of their top lawyers get on the phone with me and basically say, well, you could always go to law school after you're done with this and pay for it in cash. And coming out of the government where salaries were really low and I had high student loans, like the idea of ever having enough cash to pay for something as expensive as law school, in one payment seemed completely mind boggling. And I was like, yeah, but I wasn't motivated by the money. I was coming out of like a very heavy mission oriented job. And the thing that really shocked me and really got me to give the technology side of things a second look is that every single person that I met at Palantir, including, of course, all the founders and all the leadership team and everybody else too, it wasn't just the leadership team, seemed to be even more concerned about the missions that I cared about. And at the time, protecting the country, because at the time, Palantir didn't have a commercial business at that phase. And so they all seemed even more passionate about that mission than even some of my most passionate friends on the inside. So it felt like a really easy transition once I connected those dots and made those relationships. And then, of course, once I was in a technology company, the temptation to be deep on technology is just everywhere. In fact, I remember a group of us early on who did not go to Stanford all signed up to take one of Stanford's intro computer science classes, which at the time they had just put out as an online class.
That's one of the first. That's right.
Yeah. And we started grading each other, and we went, I did 2 or 3 semesters of Stanford CS, but I never stepped foot on Stanford campus other than actually being born there. But I have otherwise no connection whatsoever to the campus. So
that's and then there's so many things so many gems there, I guess. Starting back at the high school fair, do you have a sense of what else came out of that? I mean, is that you're talking about the Silicon Valley Energy Technology Fair? I have to imagine at some level your teacher was jealous because that's where you get to be at that moment in time. Were the other folks, I guess, that you were competing against in your school? Did they go on to build things we've heard of? Is that kind of what it was like? Was it in the water over there?
I don't know if I can directly tie a specific person to something that we've heard of per se. But in the aggregate, I know it's true. I mean, I think in retrospect, the thing that actually motivated me more than our project that I had with my partner is like the other people that came with us. Not all of them had the same level of success from an awards perspective.
Right.
But I think if he were here talking about it with me right now, I think we would both admit that some of the other projects were even more exciting. I mean, one of my classmates was doing compression work to store data, like 100 or 1,000 times more efficiently than it was being stored at the time. The guy that won the fair the year that I was doing it, I'm not completely sure of the exact utility of this device, but he made a glove, and this was a long time ago. He made a glove that you could do sign language with, and then it would print the text. So that was far ahead of its time. This was a high school student, right? One of my friends was doing, DNA splicing work. I mean, people were doing really advanced stuff. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, the way this program works is that you're supposed to have an industry mentor. So
Right.
everybody is getting plugged into someone in industry who can kind of teach them some of these harder things. And that's the kind of the whole point, is that industry is giving back and the students are also coming up to speed on these technologies. But just seeing what was possible there definitely gave me a bug that has lasted for a lifetime.
It's hard to not think about like the ease with which technology has grown to the ability to do things, a democratization of different processes, from at this point it feels like it's everything. So like the ability to like have a picture painted for you based on a prompt, so you don't need to have any artistic inclination, just you need the ability to prompt something to do that. Do you see that? How do you see that playing into kind of those types of situations where, I mean, as a high school kid, I know I certainly wasn't winning science fairs, right? So how are you? What do you think it looks like for the kids these days, and maybe in the future, like the ability to, you were limited by your ability to do the research on gas emissions and I don't know if you guys actually like built an engine or did any of that
It's
stuff.
funny you mentioned that. We wanted to build an engine, and we got a couple of books about how to build an engine. And then our mentor said, guys, you could build that engine, but then you're not going to really be able to run the experiments because it's going to take you the entire semester to build the engine.
Yeah.
And what was suggested instead, which was a great idea, which was basically to use leaf blowers. And so we just used
Interesting.
leaf blowers and then experimented with different additives and then measured the emissions off of the leaf blowers. So it was a lot less gratifying in that we didn't build anything. We were simply running a set of experiments to try to prove which additives were more efficient at reducing emissions. But it also made the experimental setup a lot easier. And then I think this goes through to product, right? When you think about product, it is very scientific. It's about how do you test this very precise thing that you're trying in the market and get exactly the signal you need without overdoing it, right? Like
Yeah.
without building the engine. And like, yeah, in retrospect, would it have been really fun to build the engine and would that have been a better story? Sure. But would we have placed in the fair and would it have, elevated our confidence in our ability to tackle these really difficult problems? Probably not, right? It probably would have been
Yeah.
like, okay, that's cute that you guys built an engine, but like, why? Like these already exist,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you wouldn't. It's not like, yeah, BP would, or whoever builds the engines. I guess Ford would have like found you and like, oh, you guys are now going to be our engine makers,
Yeah,
engine
exactly.
designers. Yeah, I mean, it
Exactly.
sounds like you got everything you possibly could have gotten out of that program, and then most of it. And the reason why they probably do it is the inspiration to join this field. And I have to imagine that teacher somewhere is smiling, knowing that that he made such an impact on the trajectory of your life that you were able to now have the confidence to do these hugely big things based on a couple extra hours of not watching TV
For
or doing
sure.
whatever you're going to do with your time
For
in high school.
sure.
Yeah.
In fact, it led to me keeping in touch with that professor for, decades now. I even saw him a couple years ago. He phoned me up and he said that he was retiring. And hey, do you want there, for every booth at the science fair, you've got like an official number, and it says like engineering dash 12345, or if you're in life sciences, it'll say life dash 12345 and your number. And he had apparently taken our number and put it up in the classroom, and it had been up in the classroom for the successive, 20 years or whatever it was.
That's amazing.
And he said, hey, I'm closing up the class. Do you want it back? And apparently we had even both signed it too, which was funny. So
Oh,
I met up with him and it was great. And I thanked him again and stuff. So yeah, it was fabulous. It opens, I think every person early in their career or late in their career, if it's never happened for you, you've got to have an experience where you can excel, even if it's not expected, because that just gives you the confidence to try things that seem like they're impossible. And it doesn't mean you're going to succeed in those things. Like I've certainly made my share of mistakes in the business world, in the product world, like all things,
right.
but it teaches you that you could. And once you know you could, it's, sort of impossible to kill that flame.
How do you think that plays into what you do today?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing, and it took me a while to appreciate this because it's funny. Like, other than this podcast, I don't actually talk about the high school science fair very
Doesn't
often.
come up.
It doesn't come up that often. But when I joined Palantir, I was thrilled. I knew exactly what kind of work I was going to be able to do. I was really passionate about working on product and implementation and all of the softer things that didn't involve writing lots of computer code. Because again, I ultimately decided not to be an engineer by background.
Right.
And it was very easy to develop imposter syndrome in that kind of a company where we hired the best engineers on planet Earth. I mean, to this day, I work with startups of all stripes and colors, and it's exceedingly rare that I come across a startup that has that consistent a caliber of an engineer of what we encountered at Palantir. And so it's easy to sort of have this imposter syndrome and think, I don't belong here because I can't write code like that or do that. And so, I think the thing that the science fair has done for me later in my career is just kind of remind me like, yeah, maybe I didn't pursue that particular version of it, but I can be just as excellent, right? And maybe it's in different areas, different contributions. And ultimately, that's how I eventually fell in love with the product side of things. Because I distinctly remember one of my first weeks that I was at Palantir. I made some offhand comment to one of the guys who was more senior. I don't know why the product works like this. This seems silly. Like, we should just fix this. And he was like, "Great, get on a plane, go to Palo Alto, go fix it." And I was like, coming out of government where you take like 4 months to prepare for travel, to get approval for travel, I just like basically went to the airport with my credit card and got on a plane and went to Palo Alto. And I was having this discussion, and I sat down with the engineers, and I shared what I thought should be the case based on my experience, sort of actually doing the work. And literally the next day, everything I had said became true.
Wow.
And that's when the bug was just undeniable, because that's so elevating. You feel like, even though I didn't write the code for it, you feel like you're creating something. And especially in a team setting, it's so fantastic, because with the best engineers, they're coming up with ways to solve the problem that you didn't even think about. They're coming up with enhancements that you didn't even ask for. And you're simply the starting seed to generate the conversation that leads to a fantastic solution.
Yeah, I found that bringing in the engineering team and my engineering counterparts early in projects have led to the most successful projects. And we've solved problems, for instance, I can definitely think back to it. We found a way to A/B test on Roku devices in 2015 before that was even close to possible. Roku was still relatively new. And so it wasn't happening until it was like me and my engineering counterpart were just bouncing off ideas in his office, and then we struck the right sequence of questions and thinking that led us to the ultimate answer.
Yeah, I sometimes will joke with friends that the tragedy of the great product person is generally that they can't build the 500 things that they've written in their notebook that they might like to make into startups.
Yeah.
And frequently the tragedy for the engineer is they can build anything on planet Earth, but they're not motivated to do one of those without a spark from someone else.
Yeah.
And so, and don't get me wrong, there's exceptions on both sides. There's obviously technical PMs and there's obviously engineers who have been fantastic founders. But for most people, most days, it takes that marriage before the amazing magic actually happens. And then you get together and you're riffing on the idea and you're creating prototypes and you're showing it to people, and it's super fun. Now, I've also learned the hard way. I mean, I've been in a lot of different settings in my career. Some of them have the best engineers on the planet, and some have engineers that are much earlier in their careers, learning how to do things for the first time. Maybe they just came out of a boot camp, which isn't to say, like, plenty of great people come out of boot camps, but your first project out of the boot camp isn't going to be the same quality as your 10th, right?
Right.
And so what I've also found is that you do have to test the personalities. And so, like, one of the questions I always get asked anytime I jump in and support a new organization is, what's your process? How do you like to write your tickets? How do you like to figure out the stories and the jobs to be done, or whatever framework they like to use?
Right.
And I always kind of chuckle, because I'm like, I don't worry about any of that stuff in the beginning. I worry about that stuff in the middle, but in the beginning, I'm worried about trying to figure out who is a true thought partner, and who is somebody here who's going to be innovative, and who is somebody here who basically just wants to kind of take orders. and just kind of figure out, hey, tell me what my tickets are and I'll leave for the day. And look, like in a big enough organization, you're going to have a blend of all three of those things. And the important part is figuring out which ones they are, because I've definitely learned the hard way, right? If you over-index on that process with those fantastic engineers, they're crazy demotivated. They don't even want to work with you. Like they'll never work with you, and they'll just disappear, and you won't get any great output. And so I think it's a balance, right? So I pretty much always start everybody with like really vague guidance, and I see how they can handle that vague guidance, because if they can do well with the vague guidance, then they're going to be total rock stars. And if they can't, it's no big deal. You just start increasing the level of specificity of what you're asking for, and you help put guardrails in the system to make sure it works. And everybody is somewhere different on that journey. And I find that can be a really good model, but it's very uncomfortable for people who are used to lots of process, because they're like, whoa, like, isn't this going to all get messed up? And you're like, no, don't worry. But like, it will all get messed up anyways. Yeah. No matter how much process we use, like it's a messy game doing product, like nothing comes out without bugs. Nothing comes out with perfect communication, and you can do better at each of those things. But I find that if you start by believing that everybody is going to be exceptional, that you'll find more people who are than if you start the other way around. And it's sort of like this oppressive process, and everything must be in, this epic that flows down to this story that flows down to this task. And then the subtasks are enumerated and everything's got points and all that. And like each of those tools has a place. I'm not like anti-tool, right, but you have to judge the environment. Like I think one of the things I've become professionally good at, that's not necessarily a marketable skill, but it's something that I've realized as I reflect on what I do for a living, is that I'm very experienced at walking into a new organization over and over again, and trying to quickly figure out what could work here in this particular culture with these particular problems.
I mean, that's a super valuable skill. And to your point is also looking at what's around you. So not just taking a framework and saying, hey, here's what we should do, here's what's worked, it's the best companies. It's really taking a temperature of, who am I working with? Who are the folks that are around me? How do I maximize? How do I get the most out of what we have here? Understanding that they're not all going to be the same. There will be some rock stars. There will be some, I guess, punch in, punch out 9-to-5ers who would prefer just give me my ticket, let me go in my corner, and I'll see you at sprint ceremonies.
For sure. And we didn't have a lot of formalized policies or plans in the Palantir culture, which was really the first big formative experience there in the startup world for me. But one of the things I think most Palantir people would agree with is that we were a culture that ultimately shunned formulas, playbooks, and processes. And the reason for that isn't because they're not useful. Like, for example, checklists are like incredibly useful, right? That's how you make sure you land a plane with the landing gear down every time, right? That has a really important place. But processes and formulas for complex thought work basically give the doer of the work permission to stop thinking, right? You sort of have permission to not try to figure out, how should I be doing this? And don't get me wrong, it's always nice to start with a playbook, because you don't have to do as much thinking and you can jump in faster. And so there's a lot of advantages. It's not like
you don't have to learn the playbook. You have to learn the plays.
Exactly. It's not like one world is completely better than the other. Like imagine a football team trying to go in with no playbook whatsoever. That'd be really, really challenging, right? So you don't want to be in either extreme, but that's kind of one of the things that I really took away from that experience is like, and that's why I even named the firm what I did, First Principles, because the idea is to look at each of these problems completely fresh, try to figure out what are the root causes, what are the root factors that are driving what people are trying to accomplish, or the behaviors we're seeing in the market, or why this is working and that's not working. And it's just been incredibly freeing, and it's like, I'll tell you a funny story. At least it's funny to me. So I came again out of government, and my first week on the job at Palantir, I was told that I was responsible for all of the inbound sales leads on the company website.
Okay.
And I remember saying to my then boss, I was like, hey, listen, man, like I'm committed to the mission. I'll do whatever you want me to do, but you do know that I don't know anything about sales, right? Like I don't even like, other than I know the word sales, I don't know anything about this particular
I came from
discipline.
government. Yeah, we did not do.
Yeah, we didn't do sales. Like sales was like this icky thing that nobody even really talks about, right? It's, the evil contractor vendors, right? But what it did, and he was like, yep, I got it. He was just like, just do the best you can, you know? And I remember getting on these calls, and I'm sure that I was massively frustrating to the people on the other end of the phone. But here's what happened. I didn't waste any time on any calls with any prospects or partners that could not clearly articulate how we were going to do something really great for the mission together. Because that was the only thing I cared about. I joined the company in order to further the mission. And if someone called in and like, maybe we should do some long-term partnership, I was like, great. Is there a deal on the table where we can have an impact this week? And they would say, well, you know, just it's like long-term planning and we're just trying to like lay the groundwork. And what it did was it helped us avoid, you know, hundreds of entangling engagements that would not have actually led to any real value. Wow. Now, later in a startup's journey, you know, you do actually want to take those meetings because it makes sense to build some strategic context on things and it makes sense. But in the early days, it was exactly the right move. And, you know, I didn't know what I was doing, but somehow I figured it out, right?
And somehow you were doing it really well. And you probably did a lot of blocking that they appreciate later that, oh, wow, they didn't get through Adam. Okay, great.
And after a few months doing it, I got access to a sales coach. And that was fantastic because I would tell him the situations. And instead of him telling me, you know, go read this book, he would try to explain the philosophy behind it, you know, and then from there I could make my own decisions about whether that was right for the given context or not. And, you know, like it was amazing. Cause like I went from never doing any of that stuff to closing one of my first multi-million-dollar deals, you know, in months. Right. And it was like, it was shocking. And, you know, the funny thing about this is like, I'm sitting here in front of you because I did not become a salesperson, right? That was just something along the journey that I had to learn, you know?
That's awesome. Expanding skill sets.
Yeah, it was super fun, super fun.
That's incredible. Well, grounding it back in LA, you know, one of the things we like to do here on this podcast, and thank you so much for sharing your story and the journey from government agent to engineer to salesperson and back. What's the most LA thing that's happened to you? You know, it could be product related, tech related, or not.
Oh my goodness. I feel like there's funny ones and then there's like sad funny ones and there's good ones and there's bad ones. I'll give you a couple. One of the funnier ones was I remember going over to another founder's place, his place of work, which also happened to be where he lives. And I remember opening the front door and just like being crushed by dude sweat. And I was just like, what is going on in here? And as soon as I walked into the living room, there was a dude like, you know, doing squats with like what looked like, you know, hundreds of pounds of weight in the middle of his office. And I was just like, what the heck is going on here? And I asked him and he's like, oh yeah, that's just the intern, you know? And I feel like with LA's workout culture, that was like a very LA moment.
Interns just doing squats in the middle of the living room.
Exactly. In the middle of it was like 3 p.m. on a Tuesday or something. Now to their credit, they're a human performance focused startup. So it kind of makes sense, but it was definitely a little bit funny. I think on the like sort of haha, but not as funny, you know, I've definitely had my workday interrupted while a neighbor's house was raided for drugs, you know, specifically like an overgrown pot experiment, which definitely feels like an LA story.
SWAT team, you can hear the SWAT team breaking windows.
Something like that. So this is a lot of helicopters and a lot of sirens. So, you know, there's some funny stuff like that. But I think, you know, my most LA moments are the routine ones, you know, trying to take calls on the 405 or losing somebody in a canyon, right?
Losing someone in a canyon, that's a very LA specific thing. That's amazing. Love it. Well, thank you again, Adam, for joining us. Our guest is Adam Judelson. Also like to thank our sponsors, PMA LA, available at pma.la, and Uruit, available at uruit.com, uruit.com. I'd like to thank you all for listening to us again. This is a great episode. I love this one, Adam. We'll catch you next time on Product in LA.